due to the community with the lowest rates in the province. Also,
everybody's deeply saddened over this.
a beloved Vancouver transit operator dies after being pinned between two buses.
My heart just drops when I read the numbers.
Another horrific month for toxic drug overdoses in BC has advocates pleading for more to be done.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Hospitals in the Peace River region of BC's northeast are being pushed to the brink. With staffing shortages and mounting COVID cases, the area also has the lowest vaccination rate out of anywhere in the province. Our Brady Strachan went there and found out even talking about vaccinations has become taboo.
In Fort St. John, the trucks vastly outnumber the pedestrians. Oil and gas is the main industry here, and people come to find work here, many from neighboring Alberta. On the streets, there's one topic many avoid.
It's vaccines for sure, yeah. There's a lot of opinions on either side, and it's created a lot of heat within our community. That's all I have to say.
The vaccination rate in the region is the lowest in the province. Just over half the population is fully vaccinated.
I don't trust the doctors and nurses what they're saying. They always change it, always, daily. On the news, it's changed, it's changed, it's changed. Get it straight.
As the Delta variant spreads in the region, health officials say unvaccinated people are filling intensive care wards. The province says hospitals in the Northern Health region, like this one in Fort St. John, no longer have enough capacity to deal with the number of patients with COVID-19. Critically ill patients are being flown as far away as Vancouver Island to receive care. This strain on the healthcare system is what keeps local MLA Dan Davies up at night.
We are at, and in my opinion, on the verge of collapse here in the Northeast regarding healthcare. We have a critical shortage. In fact, it's even beyond a critical shortage of nursing staff. Our doctors are burnt out.
Is it up there to be done? Or?
At this pharmacy, there's a daily battle to win people over through long, thoughtful conversations about vaccines and the science behind them.
Anytime someone says, well, I've done my research, when I try to find out what that means, it usually means looking on the internet, and as I've learned, that usually means you're getting more of whatever it was you looked at the last time you looked for something.
For some people, the choice is now a financial one. Some oil and gas companies are mandating their workers get vaccinated.
I know I'll get my shots. Yeah, I will, because I want to work, but honestly, it sucks.
Brady Strachan, CBC News, Fort St. John, British Columbia.
BC's daily COVID-19 case numbers continue to fluctuate. Today, another spike. 813 people tested positive since yesterday. 11 more people have died from the virus, and our province's death toll is now at 1,953. Hospitalizations are at 340, while the number is up significantly from yesterday. Keep in mind, BC started including people who are still recovering in hospital but are no longer infectious. 146 are in intensive care. As BC's healthcare systems strain, the two outbreaks declared today were in hospitals, Royal Inland Hospital in Kamloops and University Hospital in Prince George. And in Surrey, the largest school district in BC is taking new safety measures. Starting Monday, all public school students will have to wear masks, now including the youngest kids in kindergarten to grade 3. And some schools may soon begin hosting vaccination clinics for eligible students. The Vancouver School Board has also mandated masks for all students. COVID outbreaks are hitting homeless people hard in communities across Vancouver Island. Adding to the challenge, many of those groups remain unvaccinated.
Because everybody I know that's gotten it has gotten sick, more sick than they were before.
I'd rather fight the antibodies myself.
Health officials have been closely monitoring outbreaks in Victoria, Duncan, and Nanaimo, but maintaining enough places for those testing positive for COVID-19 to isolate has been difficult. Officials are trying to increase vaccination among people living on the streets because they often face harsher COVID consequences. Well, family, friends, and co-workers are mourning the loss of a beloved local bus driver. Sharanjit Parhar died after getting pinned between two buses on Monday. Dan Burrett is live with more on this tragic story. Dan, first off, tell us about this man.
Charanjit Parhar was known for his big smile, his commitment to community, and most of all, his love for his family. Friends say he had 3 daughters and 2 grandsons he was devoted to, spending every weekend playing with them. He immigrated to Canada decades ago from the Punjab region of India. He drove a taxi, he was a welder, and spent the past 21 years as a transit driver here. But something terrible happened on Monday around 8:30. Friends say Parhar had jumped out of his driver's seat near Cordova and Canby downtown to unhook the power poles connected to overhead wires to let another driver who was running late pass him. But he somehow became pinned between those 2 buses. The 64-year-old was rushed to hospital with life-threatening injuries and later died. His union says they're now offering other drivers counseling as they struggle with his death.
He was like a very truly gentle soul to everyone. And, I have met his family as well. Everybody's deeply saddened what has happened. We are too. We're mourning through every second, every minute of it.
It's not yet clear what led to Parhar getting pinned there. Police, WorkSafe, and Coast Mountain are looking into what happened. Today, though, the entire transit system paused to remember Charanjit Parhar. The union says buses, SkyTrains, and CBus stopped for a moment of silence at 11:30 this morning, 3 this afternoon, and they will do so again tonight at 7. Anita.
Dan Burrett live for us tonight. Thank you, Dan. One person is dead and another is in hospital after a fire at a Burnaby house last night. Firefighters responded to reports of smoke at a house in the South Slope neighborhood. When they arrived, several residents were out of the home, but said there were still people trapped inside. 2 people were pulled from the house, but 1 later died in hospital. The cause of the fire is still being investigated. A man is recovering in hospital after being attacked by a grizzly bear outside the village of Grand Isle near Babine Lake. The BC Conservation Office says a local photographer was walking along an access road this morning when he was attacked. The man suffered serious injuries to his arm and was taken for treatment in Prince George. The area is a popular spot to view bears during salmon spawning season. Conservation officers say the bear was acting naturally and will not be put down. Activists on Vancouver Island were in a celebratory mood yesterday, but today back to business. After a court ruled against extending an injunction against them, they were escalating their tactics today in the Fairy Creek area. As Susanna De Silva explains, the surprise ruling wasn't just a setback for the logging company.
There was still joy today at the Fairy Creek protest site.
Absolutely euphoric. Celebration, joyous screaming. Yeah.
And while police have packed up much of their setup, signs today both sides are digging in. Logging crews created trenches to keep protesters back. Protesters tried to fill them in, leading to police warnings they still have power there.
Anybody going into that workspace will be interfering with the law.
But yesterday, a BC Supreme Court judge admonished some of the RCMP tactics at the site, including the way pepper spray has been used and officers covering badge numbers, saying there has been a serious and substantial infringement of civil liberties, including impairment of the freedom of the press. And while the judge acknowledged that damage would be done to logging company Teal Jones and to the rule of law, he felt he could not extend an injunction barring protests.
It's the first time in 30 years that I know of that there has been a refusal like this. The RCMP's misconduct has represented a threat to the reputation of the court, of course, but also it has really been stripping citizens of their rights.
Some say it's a wake-up call to police.
But I hope the RCMP learned from this experience where, in fact, when you're given the authority to enforce a court injunction, that you do it within the confines of the law.
The RCMP says it is taking time to reassess its role. Its union says officers have been patient and professional amid aggressive behavior from protesters. But the company is frustrated.
Teal Jones has got clean hands through the process. It wasn't us that caused the injunction to come to an end, but the damage is 100% on Teal Jones.
The company plans to appeal the decision and says it will call on the RCMP if they see illegal activity. Susanna De Silva, CBC News, Vancouver.
And we're just learning Teal Jones, the logging company, has filed an appeal with the BC Supreme Court. It is hoping to keep the injunction, stopping protesters from blocking the area. No word on when this case might be heard. Abbotsford police are now involved in the investigation into the disappearance of a former Abbotsford woman now living in Costa Rica. 40-year-old Jacqueline Furlan-Smith was last seen on August 17th. A Facebook page, Search for Jacqueline, has interviews with her husband. He says she left their home on foot while he was in the shower, but that she was in mental distress and was angry at him. Furlan-Smith left with only her passport and wallet, but has not used her credit cards or her passport. Her parents, who live in Abbotsford, flew to Costa Rica and have asked local police here in BC for help, as the search seems to have hit a dead end. Time now to bring in meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe. You've got your hood on, and I think you're watching a big storm moving on shore, aren't you?
That's right, Anita. Rainfall warnings issued earlier today. The sort of steady rain we've been seeing all day, and it is starting to pick up here on the North Shore. That's in advance of the main event that is coming through the overnight tonight. So let me take you through those warnings in place across the south coast. The green, that's the rainfall warning, mainly for northern sections of Metro Vancouver up towards Howe Sound, where 70 millimeters not out of the question by tomorrow afternoon. We may see higher totals, and that does mean rivers and streams will be running very high right across Metro Vancouver. Meanwhile, the yellow, those are the wind warnings, and we will be seeing those picking up through the strait towards the Sunshine Coast overnight. The biggest winds, though, Haida Gwaii, and we are already watching those winds get closer to 100 kilometers per hour. The peak happening around midnight as that front rolls through, and special weather statement for the coast. This is a powerful low pressure system, and it's the cold front that we're really watching to cut into the coast through the next 6 hours. So there's the radar, and you can see a lot of green still to come. The cold front, though, still west of Vancouver Island. So not expecting to see that cross until early morning hours. So look for a very wet overnight. It's pre-dawn, Anita, sort of between 4 and 6 a.m., just pausing you there, where that front will actually roll through. So I'll take you through what that'll mean as far as morning impact, power outages, and when we'll see the sun again, of course. That's all coming up.
Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
Well, BC is again seeing a record number of illicit drug toxicity deaths. July numbers are tied for the worst month of this year, with 184 people killed. As Zara Premji tells us, advocates are demanding more be done.
It's a reality that just keeps playing out over and over again. Leslie McBain lost her son to an overdose 6 years ago. She remembers trying to make sense of it all, and now as an advocate, she struggles with the reality of the crisis in BC.
Something isn't right with this picture. My heart just drops when I read the numbers every month.
184 people died after ingesting toxic drugs in July, tying for the worst month this year, and just 2 less than the highest number of deaths ever recorded in a single month in this province.
That's 184 families who their lives are changed forever. And not only the families, but the friends and the coworkers and, people in the religious community or whoever cared about this person.
BC's coroner worries this public health emergency is never ending.
Things have not changed. And I think what we need to recognize now is that we need fundamental shifts in practice.
We can't afford to wait. She's echoing calls many have been making for years.
Decriminalizing obviously is a key step because we need to destigmatize.
So what is the holdup? They will say that the federal government is holding us up on an exemption. I actually don't buy that.
The province maintains it is doing everything within its powers.
Last year, my colleague, Minister Farnworth, Public Safety Minister, wrote to all the police chiefs across the province to say, please do not charge people with personal possession. We do want the federal government to decriminalize so that people have full confidence that they are not going to be subject to penalties.
As you and I are sitting here talking, someone's dying.
The province says it intends to keep pushing the federal government, but the fear is that changes will come too late. Zara Premji, CBC News, Vancouver.
A U.S.-owned ranch near Merritt has won the right to close off private roads and trails on its property, essentially blocking people from accessing two public lakes. The Douglas Lake Cattle Company fought for years to restrict access. Even though the water in those lakes is public, getting there means crossing private land. This Supreme Court of Canada decision determines the Nicola Valley Fish and Game Club cannot appeal, handing the victory to the 200,000-hectare ranch. And in Vancouver, the restaurants that tried to sue the park board over a temporary bike lane in Stanley Park have had their case tossed out. The companies behind the Tea House, the Pavilion, and the Prospect Point Bar and Grill claimed the Vancouver Park Board was unreasonable in dedicating a lane of Stanley Park Drive to cyclists. A BC Supreme Court judge rejected that argument. Already suffering pandemic losses, those businesses now have to pay the Park Board's legal fees. Well, thousands of orange ribbons have been placed at the Vancouver Art Gallery to honor the residential school children buried in unmarked graves. Each ribbon placed represents the life of one child lost in residential schools. A total of 6,128 ribbons are now on the south side of the gallery. The number symbolizes the actual count of First Nations children buried in mass graves at residential schools across Canada and the U.S.
There's a whole bunch of schools that are going to be revealing additional numbers and nations. And what we're here today is we're commemorating and honoring the smallest victims of this cultural genocide.
Organizers hope all Canadians join in ceremonies to speak the truth about the history of Canada and its treatment of First Nations peoples. And watch CBC tomorrow for a 1-hour commercial-free special to honor the stories and perspectives of Indigenous peoples affected by the tragedies of residential school system in Canada. Inuk singer, songwriter, activist, and documentarian Elisa P. is hosting the special, which includes musical tributes and ceremonies in Indigenous communities across the land. Watch National Day for Truth and Reconciliation tomorrow on CBC TV and CBC Gem, or tune in on CBC Radio 1 and CBC Listen. That's at 8 p.m. here in BC. Well, thank you for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. I'm your host, Anita Bathe, and if you're not already doing so, you can always watch our program live on our free app, CBC Gem. You can also catch us on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Heartbreaking stories of loss. We take you to India next, where hundreds of children have been left as orphans after both parents died of COVID. That's next. You are watching our commercial-free live stream tonight. A woman from Peterborough, Ontario, uncovered some valuable family treasure in her home, sheet music dating back to the 1930s. Joanne Cully's grandparents performed them as a live duo in Toronto and abroad. She tells us about what it means to have a new window into her family's history.
It was quite an adventure discovering all this music. During the pandemic, I finally had enough time to tackle a task that I've been putting off for many years. I inherited 8 boxes of sheet music from my grandparents, and I just took them down to the basement and didn't really even look at them. I started one by one uncovering them and realized there were about 2,000 individual pieces of music in every genre from the 20th century. And some of the music is stamped with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. My grandparents were a 2-piano, 4-hands team, popular in the 1930s on the radio in Toronto. They had shows on CKCL and CFRB, and it really was the golden age of radio. During the Depression, many people couldn't afford to go out to live concerts, and it was a free form of entertainment. George Gershwin, of course, he was one of the most famous composers at the time. Some of it was actually arranged for 2 pianos, 4 hands, but some of the music was just for solo piano. So my grandfather would have to write out a second part for Ida, whose stage name was Claudette. My grandmother wrote notes, well, how long the piece was and which hands to use.
Knowing how the sheet music collection was used is sort of unique and interesting in that way. So it's really a collection unto itself, like not just a collection of sheet music, but it tells the story of these two performers and what they played or what they collected and what they kept. If there are little notes in them to themselves, either like performing notes or things like that would be interesting too.
I think the music really helped me to get into the milieu of the time period. I was also working on finishing a novel that I started called Claudette on the Keys, which is loosely inspired by my grandparents' lives. And it follows them during the Great Depression and how they lose their work and travel to England at a time when fascism is on the rise and how they get drawn into the pre-war intrigue.
As if COVID wasn't enough, we are now heading into flu season. And after a relatively quiet last year, there are concerns influenza and other viruses could return in a big way. And as Christine Birak explains, that means even more pressure on the healthcare system.
With COVID public health measures easing, Canadians are on the move again. And doctors say so are viruses other than COVID, and they're making us sick.
Any of the other respiratory viruses adding to COVID will make things worse, no question.
Stunningly, there were just 79 lab-confirmed cases of flu last year, compared to 54,000 the year before. While some restrictions are still in place here at home to stop COVID, countries like the US and UK are dropping them.
They're probably going to have a flu season that looks like a regular flu season. And if we have enough travel with them, we might get a flu season that looks like a flu season too.
That could put some hospital intensive care units under even more pressure. Some are already dealing with a highly infectious virus called RSV that's making hundreds of young children in Quebec sick.
He went straight to the intensive care when they saw it. So I think if it took us a little longer to realize, it could get very dangerous.
Lizia Cassiari's 12-week-old twins were hospitalized. RSV is the most common cause of bronchiolitis and pneumonia in infants.
He was using his whole body to breathe. It was like using his head, using his abdomen, and it was a matter of time for him to get too tired and stop breathing. And it's like that. The doctors, they were super scared.
Thankfully, he and his brother are now both on the mend, but new patients keep arriving.
It is pretty much worse than we've ever seen before.
Dr. Fatima Kakar says the RSV outbreak also appears to be spreading from Montreal to Ottawa. Data shows over 1,200 cases in Quebec in the last few weeks and over 130 cases in Ontario.
I think the rest of the country is a few weeks behind us. And so it's inevitable that RSV will spread.
She adds it's also a warning for the rest of the country to be prepared for a new season of viruses. Christine Birak, CBC News, Toronto.
The COVID-19 crisis in India is no longer killing thousands of people each day, but the ravages of the pandemic are still being felt. The virus has left behind tens of thousands of widows and orphans. Salima Shivji reports from Delhi, where many families are struggling to access help.
In one of the poorest parts of Delhi, the pain of COVID-19 is inescapable. It's everywhere. The loss almost too much for Sapna Devi and her sons, left without their father, their husband, the family's breadwinner. He was gone in less than a week. I feel defeated, hopeless. She barely has enough strength to fight for the government compensation offered to COVID widows and orphans. She can't read or write, and still she's managed to amass all these documents to prove her husband died after catching the virus. It's overwhelming, she says. They tell me to run around town for different forms, and it could still take a full year to get any money. Help comes in the form of a local NGO. Community workers check in on her regularly. They're also handing out bags of food and money from private donors to widows and children who've lost loved ones to the virus. For Jyoti Gupta, it's a lifeline, the only support she has. I felt so alone, struggling through my husband's illness. She's getting some help now, sorting through what documents are needed, and she's lucky to have a crucial one, an official declaration that her husband died of COVID. Not everybody does.
The women have not stopped crying. The children have not stopped crying.
The NGO's founder has seen a steady stream of women and children just trying to survive, most unable to navigate the compensation system, that is, if they're even aware of it.
Are those schemes reaching who they are meant to be for? I think there's a massive gap. More than 90% of the people do not know from the urban slum clusters where we work, where Protsahan works. They do not have an inkling of such schemes being announced.
And it's a complicated maze. Some help for those who've lost a primary caregiver to COVID-19, like pensions and benefits, comes from the national government. The rest from the states. Here in Delhi, it's a one-time lump sum of less than $900. For children orphaned by the virus, the Indian government has promised to cover their school fees and health insurance and set up funds they can access when they come of age.
The worry at this Delhi orphanage is what about now? How to tackle the emotional weight of losing a parent so abruptly. Vikas and his brother are wading through it. I feel useless. It's terrible, he says. My mother died when I was a baby, and now I don't know how to plan for the future without my father. His younger brother Akash often feels uneasy, but day by day, he says, it's getting better. Vikas laser focused on leading a dance class for the other orphan boys. It helps drown out thoughts of the change in direction his life has taken. A distraction too on the playground. These children have lost parents to the virus, but they don't live at the orphanage. They have extended family to care for them. Still, they come here every day for the company and the solace. Outside, the perils are many. They're at higher risk of depression, of dropping out of school, of being exploited.
That should be frightening all of us.
For child protection officials, the scale of the trauma across the country is staggering.
It's nothing short of national emergency. 80,000 children losing one parent, and this country losing a whole generation potentially is a disaster that would be worse than COVID.
That pain, real and immediate for those left behind, trying to survive as best they can. Salima Shivji, CBC News, Delhi.
Advocates for decriminalizing illicit drugs got a big endorsement today. One of the country's largest mental health facilities says it's time for government action. Fueled by the pandemic between April of last year and March of this year, there were nearly 7,000 opioid deaths in Canada. And as Lauren Pelly tells us, that's an 88% increase from the same period a year before.
7 years ago, Arlene Last Kolb saw her son for the last time.
July 18, 2014, our Jesse, our son, went out and he never came home. He died from fentanyl poisoning.
Since then, the Manitoba mother has become an advocate for decriminalizing drugs and creating a safer drug supply. She says that effort is gaining momentum across the country.
What is new is that people are really listening now.
Today, one of the country's largest mental health facilities formally joined that push.
As a society, we've really been using a legal frame in terms of how we think about containing substances. But this has not been successful.
Toronto's Centre for Addiction and Mental Health is calling on the federal government to ensure decriminalization applies across the country and to all currently illicit drugs, while working with the provinces to ramp up treatment options and support services.
We can't keep losing people's lives like this.
On the campaign trail, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said his party was open to working with regions interested in decriminalization. And the government may be able to take lessons from Portugal, the country's two-decade experiment in largely decriminalizing drug use while offering social supports has shown some success in reducing HIV infections and deaths.
Here we are in the intake area.
Back in Toronto, staff at this safe injection site say something has to change, or deaths here will continue.
This has clearly been as a result of the increasingly poisoned and toxic street-level drugs.
Thinking of her son, Last Kolb wonders what his life would be like now if Canada had tried a different approach.
I want our children to be safe, and I don't want them to have to go to the streets and get something illegal that will most likely kill them.
Lauren Pelly, CBC News, Toronto.
Up next, a landmark court decision involving billions in financial compensation for First Nations children. We'll tell you what's at stake.
The demonstrators accomplished their main objective, the closing of the border just south of Vancouver. Indeed, 5 border stations across British Columbia were shut down this afternoon, but by far the greatest number of protesters, perhaps 1,000, gathered at Blaine. They strung out across the highway promptly at 2 p.m., waving placards and banners protesting against a nuclear test at Amchitka. They stayed for 4 hours, and no traffic moved between Canada and the United States during that time. There was no violence, and in fact the demonstration was remarkably peaceful and remarkably well controlled. There were no difficulties like the Blaine invasion of 18 months ago. The demonstration was organized by the Alma Mater Society of the University of British Columbia, and one of its members offered an explanation as to what it was about.
I would say it is a protest in the sense we are closing the 49th parallel. It's at the same time a protest against Canada's involvement in the American empire, about our defense alliances with the United States, about the role of this country as a supplier of natural resources for the United States, about the absence of an independent political economy and an independent defense policy.
A mile east of Blaine, at a commercial truck crossing, the situation was a bit more tense, but never out of hand. Many of the truck drivers were short-tempered to start with, since they'd been held up for days in Vancouver by the current West Coast dock strike. But apart from 1 or 2 minor incidents during which police moved the demonstrators back from the American side of the border, there was no problem. And organizers late in the afternoon said they felt they'd got their point across, a symbolic closing of the border to show just how they feel about the proposed Amchitka test explosion. Mike McCourt, CBC News, at Blaine, Washington.
Today's agreement between Prime Minister Trudeau and Premier Bennett divides a forecasted $12 billion in natural gas revenues among the two governments and industry. Compared to the Alberta deal, which involved more than $200 billion, it looks insignificant. But both sides say it opens the door to major new energy projects on the Pacific coast.
We're happy because it will permit us to get on with the planning for the future. Industry does have to be certain as to the prices and prospects for oil and gas.
But despite this deal, another major energy problem is yet to be resolved. Because as much as pricing, the differences between the two governments has been jurisdiction over offshore resources. The two energy ministers agreed today to begin almost immediate negotiations on the critical question. At a news conference, Marc Lalonde said Ottawa's ownership has been confirmed by the Supreme Court, but other important elements of offshore development are still negotiable.
We are going to discuss, obviously, the question of revenue sharing and responsibility for administration.
And for its part, Ottawa has agreed to drop its controversial tax on natural gas exports. British Columbia will show its good faith by now paying more than $20 million in federal taxes, money the province has been withholding for the last year. Whit Fraser, CBC News, Ottawa.
Here are some of the stories we're following tonight on CBC Vancouver News. A transit driver in Vancouver has died after being pinned between two buses. It happened on Monday, and he died from his injuries yesterday. Sharanjit Parhar's union says he was a veteran operator. A moment of silence was held at 3 o'clock today, and another is happening tonight at 7:30. All transit vehicles and C buses will stop to pay tribute. A man is in hospital after being attacked by a grizzly bear in BC's Skeena region. He suffered serious injuries to his arm and is receiving treatment in hospital. Conservation officers say the bear was acting naturally and will not be put down.
Absolutely euphoric. Celebration, joyous screaming. Yeah, dancing. We had a big dance party right here on the side of the road.
Activists on southern Vancouver Island are celebrating today after a court decision that allows them to resume blockades, protesting the logging of old-growth forests at the Fairy Creek watershed. Now to a story about a landmark court decision. It deals with how child welfare was delivered and paid for on reserve. Advocates said it was discriminatory. A human rights tribunal agreed, and today a federal court did too. As Olivia Stefanovic shows us, there's financial compensation at stake and so much more.
More than 100 years after Dr. Peter Bryce blew the whistle on rampant deaths in residential schools, Cindy Blackstock is following his legacy.
I feel that's where we are now. The government's non-compliance to this Human Rights Tribunal decision has been linked to the deaths of 3 children. Many family separations unnecessarily have happened. We need to hold them accountable.
She started the 14-year fight to get discrimination in the on-reserve child welfare system recognized. It might have ended today.
This was a complete win for kids. And now the question becomes, will the federal government finally put down its sword?
The federal court's decision would leave Ottawa on the hook for billions of dollars. It leaves in place a Canadian Human Rights Tribunal finding of discrimination in the on-reserve child welfare system after 2006. The government would pay $40,000 to each child in it to First Nations children forced to leave their homes to access health services and some caregivers.
The amount of money is a Band-Aid solution, but the compensation would change lives.
Jay Simpson spent 16 years in foster homes, struggling to access basic services.
There was always a fight with who would pay for dental.
Ottawa argued the tribunal overreached.
There are presumably a number of children that have suffered much more egregious harm and are entitled to more compensation.
The Indigenous Services Minister says the government wants to pay on its terms.
I know people are eager for prompt resolution to this in a comprehensive fashion, and that's what we at all times are seeking to achieve.
But Indigenous leaders say that means nothing if the legal battle continues.
As Indigenous people, we have to go to the Human Rights Tribunal to verify that we're actually human beings with human rights.
Tomorrow is the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Indigenous leaders are urging all Canadians to reflect and learn about the tragic history and legacy of residential schools. 2 years ago, the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation unveiled the names of thousands of children who died while attending those schools. A few names stand out because they are reduced to numbers or insensitive nicknames. Ganhesio Deer sets out to solve the mystery of one young boy who had all but disappeared.
These are the faces of students who were forced to attend a Manitoba residential school over 100 years ago. Somewhere among them is a boy whose name sparked many questions. Dummy Bad Boy. He's one of thousands of students named on this scroll unveiled by the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation, documenting children who died at residential schools.
Keeping that information back would do more harm than making it available and potentially finding the true identity of the children.
The search begins with a single document, a death record with 2 clues. It gives a time frame for when he was forced to attend the Anglican-run Washakata Indian home in Elkhorn, Manitoba, the 1890s. And that his home and family were over 900 kilometers away. After scouring the centre's archives for clues, attention turns to Canada's National Library. Annual reports from the 1890s are online. There's a class photo of his last year at Elkhorn. At that time, residential schools were known as industrial schools, and this teenager worked the printing press to help print the town's paper, the Elkhorn Advocate. The 1895 report provides a clue on how he may have gotten his nickname. This boy is a marvel, being a deaf mute. Herman Yellow Old Woman is a member of the Siksika Nation in southern Alberta, the same community that we trace the Bad Boy family name back to. A fluent speaker, he tried to translate what is believed to be the boy's Blackfoot name, found in several records.
There's several ways that you can interpret that beginning, but it's the ending that was probably spelt wrong. So we can make a guess. We can see that it's dealing with a male horse.
But he will keep his nickname and take it to the grave in 1896. Unusual for the time, the death notice honors him as a general favorite for all who knew him. The funeral is held in Elkhorn, but the article gives no indication where he died or if he is among these unmarked graves. While we were able to answer some questions we had about this student, others remain. Who is this family? What did they call him? And which is his face in that class photo? Ganasio Deer, CBC News, Gahnawage.
The National Center for Truth and Reconciliation says it's going to update its registry to reflect this new information. This will be the first time a name has completely changed on the public memorial. The CBC series into missing names continues tonight on the National with an investigation into 4 students who have been missing for decades. And stories like these are upsetting and can remind people of difficult times in their lives. Crisis lines are offering support for survivors and their loved ones. The 24-hour Indian Residential School Survivors Line can be reached at 1-866-925-4419. So while tomorrow might be a federal holiday, not everyone will have the day off. Here in BC, provincial government employees have been given the day, along with Northwest Territories, Manitoba, Nova Scotia, PEI, and Newfoundland and Labrador. But private business owners won't be forced to close. As Jacqueline Hansen tells us, some companies, though, are choosing to mark the day their own way.
Baked into this Dartmouth company's snack business is more than local ingredients.
We are a company that uses ourselves as a force for good.
On Canada's first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, private businesses don't have to close, but Made with Local is.
It's important to me as a founder of a company that is operating on the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people here to honor that day.
Employees are also being given books written by Indigenous authors.
It's one thing to give your white staff the day off, to feel like a vacation, and that's not, really the intention here. I wanted it to be about learning and listening.
Chandos Construction is pausing work at 100 job sites to mark the day.
We're going to have an hour-and-a-half long event where we can really reflect on the legacy of the residential schools in Canada.
At least 500 employees in 5 provinces will hear from residential school survivor Freddie Taylor.
They cut my hair and gave me a different set of clothes and gave me a number 39 for 10 years.
It's very rare to get all of the sites to stand down together at the same time. I can't think of an instance in our history as an organization when we've done that.
The demand for ways to speak about these topics is on the rise.
Tatalia Nahaney helps companies start conversations about reconciliation with workbooks, a board game.
I really love this square. I learn local greetings.
And live corporate sessions, but this year...
I really can't keep up.
So she's expanding her business with 1-hour on-demand online courses on territorial acknowledgements, etiquette for allies, and more.
The barriers that companies share with me that they have in engaging in this type of work is having the time to do so.
For Made with Local, making that time is what the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation is about.
We are the ones who have to do the work, right? Like, this is our work to be done.
And like a growing number of companies, it's committed to finding more ways and days to do it. Jacqueline Hansen, CBC News, Toronto.
There is a serious shortage of workers. Why the pandemic has made a long-standing labor shortage so much worse. Next. And at 6:44, a live look at Tofino, where the surf is up. Perfect weather for someone who likes big waves. Plenty of wind and rain on the way here, too. Johanna has the weather that's cranking our way next.
When you're preparing a piece of artwork and you have to dig inside yourself.
My story is kind of personal.
Into your emotions, into your experience, into your history.
We're just trying to make our mark.
Think about what it is you want to portray. And just the act of doing that makes you revisit sometimes things that you're not very comfortable with, which means that you're doing some healing for yourself. And by sharing it, you're also helping people to participate in reconciliation.
Right now, there's so much young talent, so much new up-and-coming talent, and we need this truth and reconciliation to be more addressed. This piece here is called Not Forgotten. It's part of one of the collection that I'm doing for the missing and murdered Indigenous women and men. The eagle would be like representing her animal spirit, the strength, the pride. The arm in front of her face kind of represents that she's missing, but her spirit is still here. The symbol of the red across the eyes, and they also do it on the mouth with the handprint, represents the missing and murdered women.
The artists are all from different nations. They're all different ages. Some of them are survivors themselves, and some of them are second-generational survivors, which means their parents were in residential school.
My uncle went to residential school. He died at the school, and my mom got taken away. She was killed. When she got taken away, I had to learn to survive on my own. And by doing that I ended up in jail most of my life. I wanted to get revenge and everything for years. But then I found forgiveness. But I had to forgive myself, and I forgave others. And that's why I called it beauty within. If they were given a chance in life, they would have had something nice.
Some of these pieces actually show healing from an Indigenous perspective. I think the first step is awareness, is having people become aware of what happened in the past and what's still happening today as a result of that history. And so on the back sides of each of these pieces of artwork, we've put some suggested actions that you can take if you want to participate. And as you can see, there's lots of different pieces of artwork, so you'll have lots of suggestions. Put them in action, in reconciliation.
Well, one lucky person who bought a lotto ticket this week in Burnaby is a brand new millionaire 70 times over. This record-breaking $70 million jackpot is the largest ever won in BC history. The winner has 52 weeks to come forward to claim their prize, and the store that sold the ticket and the winner's name will be announced once they come forward. The odds of winning that jackpot? Less than 1 in 30 million. Okay, I have to ask the obvious question, Joe.
Yes.
What would you do?
If I had $70 million. So I'm thinking, Anita, sailboat around the world trip, but I wouldn't actually tell anyone. So if the connection tomorrow is a little spotty, because I'll try and recreate this on the sailboat and just, continue to do live hits while I sail around the world. Just a thought.
Hey,
where are you at with?
As long as you're still giving us the forecast.
I promise. Yes, the money won't get to my head. I promise.
Uh-huh.
What about you?
I've got to say, I'm a thinker when it comes to this stuff. So I'll invest some, give some to charity, and then travel is probably the biggest one for sure.
There's room on my sailboat. There's room on my sailboat, Anita. Yeah, we can share that. But who needs to actually go somewhere in person when we have amazing live cams? That is a segue to take you to the shot that we've been checking in on every night since the eruptions on the Spanish Canary Islands. The La Palma volcano has been erupting since September 19th. This is a live shot, and you can hear those eruptions once again. Really active early morning hours. Last night, it did make its way down the volcano, hitting the water. We are now seeing a delta forming, so basically an island forming over land. The toxic gases we're worried about really contained, and the coastal villages were evacuated well ahead of time. But some powerful stuff happening tonight in La Palma, so we'll keep you posted on that. I just love that you can also hear the power. It also looked like the lava flow itself is on fire. A new update from today, banana plantations have been catching fire, and that's adding extra smoke to the problem. So again, we'll keep you posted. Bringing us back to our own West Coast natural wonder, which is this storm, the center of the low, tracking closer to Haida Gwaii. It's almost what we call bombing out. That's when a low pressure system goes through rapid deepening or cyclogenesis, and that's what we're seeing. Just giving you an indication of how strong the center of that storm is. We're getting the bottom end of that same storm overnight tonight into tomorrow morning. We're going to see those rains and winds ramp up for us. So the current radar showing heavy rain crossing the island. We're going to look for the strongest of those wind gusts and the heaviest of the rain pre-dawn hours, so sort of between 4 and 6 a.m. Before this front passes, and we'll see winds ease. But we could be talking upwards of 100 millimeters for parts of Metro Vancouver, specifically the North Shore and Howe Sound. It's going to be gusty behind that front tomorrow, but we'll actually see winds ease. And then what a forecast to come out of the storm for, Anita. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, it's almost sailing weather, I might say.
I feel like you're not telling us something, Jill.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying I have the winning lottery ticket. I'm not saying I don't.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, help wanted signs are a common sight these days. More and more businesses are struggling to find enough workers. As Kyle Bax reports, the problem is getting so bad, experts say it's hampering the country's economic recovery.
It's almost October, but these crews will be installing air conditioners in Edmonton for several more weeks. They're behind because the company has struggled for months to find enough workers. The situation is so dire, crews from out of province are coming to help.
We've been running and recruiting the entire summer. So trying to really grow the business in order to meet our immediate customer needs.
Many businesses, big and small, are in the same predicament.
The employers really are struggling. Most of them that are calling us are begging for help.
A new survey shows more than half of Canadian businesses can't find the workers they need, and that means filling fewer orders. The labor squeeze is hurting the country's economic recovery.
It's everywhere, and it's every industry, every part of the country. It's more acute in some part of the country, like in Quebec and BC.
With a national unemployment rate of about 7%, there should be plenty of job seekers. He blames factors such as an aging population, reduced immigration during the pandemic, and many unemployed people switching careers.
This is not going to go away. This is going to stay with us.
Still, not everyone is finding a job in their preferred field.
I thought that was going to be my retirement job for the rest of my life.
This construction worker lost his full-time job in the spring and is now settling for a lower wage doing temporary work.
Now I'm really don't know where I'm going to be.
The hospitality industry is one of the hardest hit sectors.
There's been the lack of trust in our industry in terms of us having to open and close so many times in the last 18 to 19 months.
It's why many food service bosses are offering profit sharing, bonuses, and health benefits, among other perks. Kyle Bax, CBC News, Calgary.
during a COVID lull back in June, a hospital team in Saskatchewan decided to boost morale by making a video. Now, in the midst of the fourth wave, how their fun is proving infectious, but also a little controversial. That's next.
Winter is coming and our gardens are full of goodness, so when to harvest to get the most out of it? I'm Robert Salisbury. Let's look at 5 of them. Strawberries are one of my favorites. Who doesn't love strawberry? After our hot summer when they didn't perform, we're seeing a big flush of strawberries now in the fall. So your foliage is really dense. You can harvest them anytime, but you don't want to wait till a frost. It'll damage the fruit. You got to kind of pull the foliage back and cut them, don't pull them, to get at the good stuff. Scarlet runner beans are my family and I's favorite. Sauteing them up with a little butter, it's absolutely wonderful. You can't eat them raw though. They're mildly toxic eaten raw. You gotta cook them. As you can see, they climb like crazy. What you wanna do is you wanna wait till the pods are about 8 inches. Again, cut them, don't pull them, and they can't take any frost. So you wanna make sure to get all the beans off before that frost hits. Carrots are the classic root vegetable in Alberta. Now, you don't have to be in a hurry harvesting these guys. They can take a few hard frosts. In fact, it sweetens them up a little bit. Just don't wait until the ground is solid all around them. Now, you kind of lift it up a bit, and you see they're fairly dense in there. Okay, so when you pull them, try not to pull one big shot of them. Try to pull them out and space them out so they get that big instead of staying that big. Leeks are one of my favorite. It's a beautiful flavor for soups or a lot of different recipes. They're a long crop, so you gotta seed them early in like March, but you wanna wait until the stalk is at least 1 inch in diameter, preferably more, and don't cut it, dig it right out so you get the roots and all. Now with your cabbage, you wanna make sure the heads are at least 4 inches in diameter, preferably 6 or more. You don't have to panic about these ones. They can take a little light frost. Unlike the cucumbers, peppers, tomatoes, beans, you gotta get them off before the frost hits. This here, the head, is a bit loose. Move on. So this head, it's tighter, it's nice and firm, and when you harvest this guy, let's size up a bit more. When you harvest it, you want to cut right under the leaves with a sharp knife or pruners. Don't yank anything. Just make a habit, not just start yanking stuff in the garden. It's not good for anything. The holes here, that's from the worms. It's kind of a garden tax. It means it's certified organic. Not going to hurt anyone. So much to harvest, so much goodness. Happy fall.
And before we leave you tonight, healthcare workers don't have a lot to laugh about at work these days, but the staff at Victoria Hospital in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan wanted to change that, if only for a few minutes. They recorded a music video to lift their spirits. Take a look.
You know the bed feels warmer, sleeping here alone.
We just thought everybody needed a good boost for morale. And working in a prolonged period when everybody gets fatigued, everybody thinks they're the only ones going through this, and they forget that there's a really big picture and there's many different departments that are all going through the same thing.
What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Stand a little taller.
Looking at some of the comments, which the majority of them have been overwhelmingly positive, but there were a lot of comments on how in the world, when we were this busy, would we be able to practice choreography and organize this? And really, it's a lot simpler than you think it is. One of our social workers here at the hospital is our choreographer. She teaches dance outside, and it was literally, we took about 15 minutes in each department. We filmed it the last third of June, so we weren't in the surge that we are now. It was just heartwarming to see it, and it was heartwarming to see people laugh and smile and have fun, because it's been really tough.
Doesn't kill you, makes you stronger. Stand a little taller. Doesn't mean I'm lonely when I'm alone. What doesn't kill you makes a fighter.
Anything for a little bit of happiness during this pandemic. That's it for our show tonight. You can always find our program online, cbc.ca/BC. And Dan is here at 11 o'clock after the National. Good night.